Welcome to 3 Count Commentaries. In this video, we will be discussing Dark Side of the Ring, Johnny K9 slash Bruiser Bedlam. So, I think this was a fairly good episode of Dark Side of the Ring. It actually felt like a real Dark Side of the Ring situation because you had a guy who was essentially living a double life. I did love the thread that they played throughout the show. The thread of this guy being ambitious. Now, they do some stuff in here that I don't particularly like, and that I really just noticed that they do a lot of. And well, they did it in this episode. I'm pretty sure they've done it in others. Is that they don't do a good job of really setting the stage for who the guy is. You know, telling us what his name is, for instance. Like, we didn't really know that Johnny K9's name wasn't even Johnny. Like, I knew that because I did the extra research, which I always do. But if you are a fan who just walked into this show for the first time, you know, they didn't tell you what his name is, where he comes from, or anything like that. They didn't tell you who trained him or anything like that. You know, you get that stuff as you go along. But, you know, that to me sounds weird. Like, when you watch like true biographies or documentaries on guys, you start from the bottom. You know, you start with where he comes from. What kind of town did he live in? You know, where did he, you know, where did he cut his teeth? That kind of stuff. And they didn't really do a lot of that here. As when we come into Dark Side of the Ring, it's 1987, and Johnny K9 is a jobber for the WWF. He's working Maple Leaf Wrestling at the time, is what it was called, which is WWF when they bought into Toronto, the Toronto area. So Ion Corto is the name of Johnny K9. And he actually had worked in Stampede, I believe, before he came to the WWF. So he had some experience before he came to WWF. And of course, in the show, they talked about him being a job guy. So they even showed a nice little clip of Gorilla Monsoon basically busting his chops about the signal that he did. So I didn't talk about the cast. So the cast of the show was Scott D'Amore, who was a friend. Lance Storm, who he met in Smoky Mountain. Same for Chris Jericho, who was on the show. Jim Cornette, who pushed him in Smoky Mountain. Tracy Edwards, his wife. You have Bill Dunphy, who is a journalist to talk about the crime situation. And Lynn Isnor, who also is in this episode to talk about his criminal background. So, so of course we have to start with him being a job guy in the WWF, and that didn't quite work out for him. He decides he wants to move on, but because he can't get anywhere, he turns to a life of crime. But before we get there, Scott D'Amore is going to talk about him trying wrestling somewhere else. I think he's talking about ICW in this situation. And Scott D'Amore met him in a locker room, and that he was this muscled up Fu Manchu, you know, guy who, to be quite honest, scared him. They say, but he helped him get booked everywhere because he was such a likable guy that, you know, he made friends. And Tracy, who I'm not completely not surprised that she was a stripper when they met. That she was essentially a stripper when she met Johnny K9. It was essentially love at first sight. Then we get the story of, you know, Johnny having an abusive dad, drunk abusive dad, which leads us to why he feels the need to always stand up for himself and to be a tough guy. Because, you know, when you're a kid and you've been abused, sometimes you don't know how to act on that. So you project onto other people that they're trying. Every little thing is like reminds you of that trigger. So that's why he's kind of like this, you know, this temper. But he also had this fun-loving side where he liked being the center of attention. He liked having fun. And then Tracy tells this story of like how he used to make her laugh. And she says that, you know, hey, he used to order pizza and then answer the door naked. And I just said to myself, the poor pizza boy. You come delivering your pizza, and next you know, fucking Soda Popimski is standing in front of you butt ass naked. That's not. wasn't just 2 episodes ago we thought that, dudes showing their dicks to people was a capital offense. And now all of a sudden it's portrayed as a joke. See what I mean? What I told you, keep your eye on Vice, right? It was this is a sexual assault, isn't it? Isn't this sexual harassment? Guess it doesn't matter because it was a pizza boy, right? It was a pizza boy. So pizza boys, I mean, they're not human. In any event, Scott Demore talked about how he liked being Johnny K9, liked being the center of attention, and that he told this story about being at a show in Michigan, MCW, and that he starts playing the drums and singing because it popped the boys, made the boys laugh. So he starts to do that, and it's at this show that he meets Jim Cornette. And Jim Cornette and the Heavenly Bodies, they're booked to be at MCW, and Cornette sees him. He says he's like a old school strong man. And he says, I got to get this guy and bring him down to Tennessee. So he talks to him into coming down. And he sees the tattoo on his stomach that says True to the Crew. And he asked him about it. He said, Johnny, what's up with this True to the Crew thing? He says, no, me and my jailhouse friends just decided to get this. And then Cornette, being the smart ass, is kind of like, hey, you didn't have to keep that promise. Like once you're out, and how are they going to find you and find out? And he said that was his only inkling that Johnny K9 had been involved in anything illegal. So he says that he changed his name to Bruiser Bedlam after Dick Bruiser, because Dick Bruiser had a show called Bruiser's Bedlam. So that makes sense, and of course this is where we meet Lance and Chris Jericho and Smoky Mountain, and later they would talk about the Smoky Mountain flop house, where apparently Jericho and all the boys would live in this flop house in Tennessee, and Bruiser Bedlam didn't know how to wash dishes. So Jericho tells this pretty humorous story of Bruiser Bedlam just holding a dirty plate under the water, letting the water cascade over it, not scrubbing it to get the bits of food and stuff off of it, but just running it underwater, running the water over the plate, and then putting it into, putting it away, which is, it's funny because there's so many people who do that. It's so trifling, but there's people who do that. It's definitely people who don't fully wash plates or forks. Man, there's nothing worse than a not properly washed glass, a not properly washed fork. Oh, but I wasn't triggered by it. I just thought it was funny. So Cornette introduces Bruiser Bedlam via vignettes to show off his toughness. And one of them is him punching nails into a board. Another one is him trying to break beer bottles over his head. And Cornette starts to talk about how he kept trying to break that beer bottle and it wouldn't break. And then Cornette had to gimmick it so that he could smash it over his head. There was also another one where he did like, they didn't talk about it here, but I've seen it on the network, where he does like, he's lifting weights or whatever. That one, he's also being like an absolute maniac. And all these vignettes are built to accentuate his look and what Cornette wants him to be, which is this tough bully. The name says it all. He's a bruiser. He's a brawler. That's what he wants to portray. So everything is about showing Bruiser Bedlam be as tough as possible, impenetrable, and being an absolute badass. And in order to prove that point, he had him beat Bullet Bob Armstrong, who is a big star down south. Probably, I believe he's the bigger star down in Georgia than he was in Tennessee. But I'm pretty sure he's still pretty famous in goddamn Tennessee. Where Bruiser Bedlam is, he's starting to see success. They're really pushing him. They're getting behind him, and he actually has this huge match with Randy Savage, and he ends up getting a win over Randy Savage. Randy Savage offers to put him over because he wants to do business the right way, which is he sees this guy has momentum. Beating him wouldn't have done Randy any good, but it would have done Bruiser Bedlam, especially for the territory, would have done him a great job, great favor rather for Randy to do the job. So he does. And this was seen as finally a validation for Bruiser Bedlam. Like he was always trying to work off being a job guy in the WWF, not really wanting to be of low status. And finally he was able to break through, and now he's a top guy, but it doesn't last very long because now Cornette wants to, quote, change out talent. And he says, like, hey, we couldn't fit him into what we were doing from that point forward. So we now have to let him go. And said there was no problems with him or anything like that. And he even says that he would have to see video evidence of Bruiser Bedlam blowing up a police station in order to believe that he actually did it, which, goes to show the depth of, loyalty that some guys may have for others. Weird how that works, right? But we also have to talk about the criminal part, because Bruiser Bedlam, or Johnny K9, grew up in a deindustrialized city. And so he grew up poor. And he worked, even though he wasn't making a lot of money in Smoky Mountain, or he had never really made a lot of money in wrestling in general. He supplemented his income by doing crime. So he was a leg breaker for the Gravel family. He's almost like a real life Rocky Balboa, where he would, in his spare time, or maybe this might even been his full-time job, he would go and collect money for the mob. And so that didn't last very long. He wanted to be a boss. So he tells this story about his brother always wanting to be, his brother being a biker. And he always wanted to be a biker like his brother. So he went to join a biker gang. So the biker gang that he joins is called Satan's Choice. And it's essentially, I think it's an offshoot of, is this one that's the offshoot of the Hells Angels? It's one of the two. But Mark Carlos, who was in the biker gang with him, talked about, hey, look, this guy was extorting bars in Hamilton, Ontario, and still driving out to do wrestling shows for $200 because he really wanted to make it. He really wanted to make it as a wrestler, but all the money was in crime. So they talked about him being, after Smoky Mountain, that all he could get was small independent work after that. He really couldn't find anywhere. And he thought Smoky Mountain was going to lead to his big break. Like, he's really going to be a big star. But it ended up not happening for him. And so he ended up just basically running this biker gang, Satan's Choice, out of Hamilton, Ontario. And the police would stake out the joint. And he would go over and talk to the police and just chat with the police. And Mark Carlos he looked very uncomfortable in this documentary too, by the way. He looked very uncomfortable talking about this stuff, which made me to believe that he is very, very serious about some of the stuff that he was saying. And that maybe, it also made it sound like, that Johnny K9 was just so affable that he was kind of stupid. And I think that was another little through line here. Like when Jericho talked about the dishes, he wasn't smart enough to know to just clean the dishes off. He just, just wanted to be helpful. He's almost like a puppy. He just wanted to be helpful. He doesn't know he's making a mess, And in this situation, he wants to kind of show off that he's a boss to the police, but he's chatting with the police and giving them information without knowing that that's what he's doing. He's not paying that any attention, So it's a very interesting thing here. So they said in 1996 he runs into this guy Michael Dubé, and Michael Dubé runs another Satan's Choice from a different city. And the two of them decided to go to the Solid Gold strip club, which they got kicked out of for wearing their biker colors. Then the cops are called because, of course, bikers, they don't like being told what to do. The Satan's Choice guys back down. Then they decided they were going to bomb the strip club. So Michael Dubé talks Johnny K9's crew into coming up with the bomb material. Once they passed the bomb material to Michael Dubé's group, they decided to change their mind and bomb the police station. So once the police station is bombed, because they felt disrespected, the Sudbury police station. Now we got this scene in 1997, I believe it is, of the raid where like the SWAT is trying to bust in the door to Satan's Choice while he's in there with his wife. And his wife is like, she thought that the gangsters were finally coming in to get him. And when she found out it was really just SWAT. So they had this great footage from the news of, the police taking down the Satan's Choice things off the wall, which, and he said when he was being arrested for this, that he kind of blurted out, it's kind of like what they call an excited utterance, which is, you're trying to rationalize what took place, that it wasn't what was supposed to be for the police. It was supposed to be for the solid gold. So essentially, he admitted that he was involved with it. And he ended up getting bail, which led to people to thinking that he is a snitch. So he got kicked out of the gang. Gang essentially got closed down. Tracy was absolutely agitated with people calling him a rat and all the rat accusations, that she was, fighting on his behalf and trying to protect his manhood and his reputation. And she thinks that, there's threats on their life and everything. So she leaves for Vancouver in Western Canada. In 2002, they were divorced. He got out of prison. He came to find her. They reconnected. He said he wanted to open a wrestling school. He ended up going to jail instead. He went to jail for a double murder of the Gill Banks. Apparently, a couple of middle-aged folks who were murdered in the middle of the night in connection with the Gravel drugs cases in this town. She was a district attorney. They didn't mention that here. That's another thing that, that I said, like, there's things that they skip. Like, they assume that you know this, but Lynn Gilbank was the district attorney. All right. The woman that's the one who they came in to kill. And they ended up killing her husband because he was just up and they walked into him first. So they shotgunned him, then went and shotgunned her. Then Johnny K9 and Andre Gravel were arrested, I think 5 or 6 years later, for this double homicide. He ended up getting 20 months in prison before him and Gravel are released because the police have no prospect of a conviction. He sues for malicious prosecution. And in 2007, Tracy and Johnny K9, they get remarried. She tells him that she thinks he could do movies. So he goes and he tries to do movies. They actually showed clips from one of his movies, but he wasn't very good at it. And wrestling has shit pretty much dried up by this point. I mean, the guy's, I think, is in his mid-40s or something like that. So then he decides he wants to join the Hells Angels. And he joins a Hells Angels offshoot called the United Nations. And now they're bringing drugs in the house again. And they're selling weed out of the house. And then there's a gang war and another young man gets murdered. There was also an attempted murder in this situation as well. I think there was I think this guy was 24 and the other victim was 20. I'll probably go through that in the extra portion in a second. But this is where we kind of get a little weird because the first degree murder charge is dropped, but he pleads guilty to attempted murder. I think that's on the 17-year-old girl. He then gets hit with 4 years in prison. After he serves his 4 years in prison, he's released into a halfway house where he ended up dying. And of course, they say, well, the manner of death was up to it's up to debate. Where some people say that he died of a heart attack. Then Mark Carlos thinks that it was drugs, that he got a hot shot at drugs, which is, some probably tainted heroin or something like that. Tracy believes that, he was maced by the guards in prison. Then Scott Demore is like, oh, he was told that it was natural causes. So nobody knows what the guy died of. It's just a bunch of conspiracy theories of what he died of. But everybody knows for sure that he's dead. So, Tracy says, look, Johnny K9 wasn't exactly the nicest guy in the world, but he's not a killer. He's not a murderer. And Dunphy, the journalist, says, absolutely not. He was a dangerous man, and there is no doubt in my mind that he killed somebody. And, he didn't say that he killed any of the people he was accused of killing, because they had no evidence that he killed anybody. But he believes that he killed somebody. No, I don't buy that. So Lance Storm kind of choked up a little bit by saying, hey, we all want happy endings for guys that we know, and that he was a nice guy, and it was all a big shock. Every time something crazy happened, these guys were shocked to hear about it. And you would think after 10 years or whatever of, hey, Johnny, he got arrested again, you would kind of get used to it. But they were still kind of like every time, because it got more and more ridiculous. Like the exploding at the police station. Then there's a double homicide. Then there's an attempted homicide and another first degree murder charge. Then he gets arrested for all sorts of other stuff. And you're like, wow, like this guy's is crazy. Now I did like what I believe it was, I'm not sure if it was the cop or the journalist who talked about, who tied it all together at the end, who said that, you know, Johnny K9's life is one of thwarted ambition. You know, he was a low level drug and, you know, low level guy in the Gravel gang. He was basically a leg breaker, but he could have done that forever and been fine. But he wanted to be a boss. He wanted to be a star. You know, so he started his own biker club, but he wasn't any good at it. He was talking too much. He was, you know, constantly in trouble, and he ended up taking the whole club down. And it parallels his wrestling career almost completely. He was a job guy in the WWF. He was not happy with that. He decided to go out and try to get more. He finally finds a space where he can become a top guy in Smoky Mountain, and that's a short-lived run. So every attempt at breaking out from being low level and, you know, trying to push beyond his capabilities, it's all very short term. It's never a long term success for him, and that's a beautiful bow on this story. You know, Lance Storm also puts a nice little bow on it by saying, "Hey, you know, wrestling is subjective. For some people, the only thing they're going to know is he was a job guy from the WWF, but there's going to be other people who are going to know that were, hey, I was there when Bruiser Bedlam beat Randy Savage." You know, so that's a very interesting thing too, because that's something to consider. You know, especially when you think about wrestlers and their legacies and stuff like that. Some guys do just become known as mid carders or jobbers or whatever, despite if they were top guys somewhere else. You know, so that's something to consider. All in all, though, I think this was probably uh, a very good one to do because of the material that you had on deck. Just unfortunate that I don't think enough people care because it's not salacious enough. It's like there's a lot of double homicides and that kind of stuff, but it's never really gone into in detail. So I guess that's what I have to do. I have to go into some of the details of the Johnny K9 cases. So let's get into some of that. All right. So this is from the Press Reader. Who killed Lynn and Fred Gilbank? So this was from 2013, November of 2013. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but these, I believe, are the children of the Gilbanks who are being sued by Andre Gravel for slander. Because I think, is it slander or libel? It's one of the two. Because they still believe that he killed their parents. So there's a wife, husband are found dead in the Ancaster home. The killer's trail includes 5 shotgun shells and 2 white gloves. A drug kingpin is suspected of ordering the hits as a warning to snitches. Police lay murder charges, only to have withdrawn 15 years later and still no answers. There's absolutely no punctuation in that statement, so it was very hard for me to read. The discovery of his mother in bed, dead from 3 gunshot blasts, his father on the 2nd floor, landing with 2 shots to the back, and Mark Gilbank himself screaming and shaking his father's lifeless body. The notorious slayings rocked the legal community, led to charges of police corruption, and remain unsolved. Gilbank, now 41, says he is still coping with the trauma of finding his mother, Lynn, and a criminal lawyer, thought to have been the target of a gangland hit, and his father, Fred, a computer expert, likely killed simply because he was in the house at the time. So they talked to the parents, Mark and Kristen, who are now in their 40s. Well, they're probably in their 50s now because this was 8 years ago. So it says that brother and sister are being sued for libel by Hamilton crime boss Andre Gravel. One of the men eventually charged with the murder, but never brought to trial. Gravel has also launched a wrongful prosecution lawsuit against the Hamilton police. Emotionally, it's still very traumatic, Gilbank said in an interview this week, and the ongoing court case is also a matter of stress. The Gilbank children spent years clamoring for justice after the collapse of the Crown's first-degree murder case against Gravel and Ion Croitoru. known as Johnny K9, an ex-wrestler described by police as the Gravel's family's muscle. Croitoro is in jail now for conspiracy to commit murder with a Vancouver gang. Charges against Gravel and Croitoro were dropped in 2006 when the Crown determined there was no likelihood of a conviction. Mark and Kristen say they are not able to talk about the case now given the lawsuit launched by Gravel, and CTV's W5 program aired a 2007 segment about the killings. So he said Gravel acknowledged in an interview with The Spectator this week that he has a long history of criminal convictions for drugs and smuggling, but insisted he has never been involved in murder. Gravel said he's suing to clear his name because the years since the Gilbanks were killed have been hard on his side too. It's been a strain on my family. We're a family of 6 girls and 5 boys, Gravel said of his brothers and sisters. The process is now before the courts, and I believe in the courts. Gravel's malicious prosecution suit claims, quote, negligent investigation, abuse of power, malfeasance in public office, conspiracy to injure, and intentionally inflict harm by unlawful means. In the libel lawsuit, Gravel claims that comments and other content in the W5 program greatly injured his character and held him up to public scandal, ridicule, and contempt. Gravel has said the police pursued him to the exclusion of other possible killers. The Gravel wrongful prosecution suit refers to Mark Gilbank as an alternate suspect. It claims, quote, police failed to investigate evidence that would implicate Mark in the homicides, evidence that included gunshot residue on the then 27-year-old's hands. Gilbank is well aware he has been floated as a murder suspect. He told The Spectator that this theory is, quote, baseless, groundless, and despicable. He said in an interview this week he has been cleared by the police, who confirmed his alibi of being in London with his girlfriend and not in Hamilton until late on the day in question. Lynn and Fred Gilbank died about 12 hours before Mark arrived. Mark Gilbank said he was the prime suspect at first, quote, just by the nature of the fact that I found my parents' bodies. The residue from the murder scene at the house, he said this week. He said, quote, I voluntarily submitted to a gunpowder residue test. They, the police, found that the results were inconsistent with somebody who had fired a weapon. They found they were consistent with somebody who was at the crime scene shaking their father and screaming. All right, so also for people who never studied, what's the word I'm looking for? Not criminology, but this strain of criminal justice. When people say consistent with, it's because they cannot say for certain how a thing happened. So what you literally see all the time is blunt force trauma to the head consistent with being hit with, a baseball bat or something like that. That didn't mean that you got hit with a baseball bat. It means that it may make the same damage to the head, or it may leaves the same kind of welt or something like that. They don't know for sure. They'll just say consistent with. Also, when it comes to gunshot residue, you can get gunshot residue on you if you're near a fired weapon or if you touch somebody who's been shot. So that's just a little aside. So it says Gilbank, go back to the article. Gilbank said allegations that he could have killed his parents are simply other people, quote, victimizing the victim. Years of investigation into the killings began with little physical evidence and no real clues. It was Kristen who suggested to the police that one of her mother's cases might have triggered her death. Lynn had helped arrange the witness protection program for drug mule Willie Smith. He had hired Lynn after he was arrested in Toronto airport with about 18 kilograms of hash oil, worth about $500,000, that he was allegedly carrying from Jamaica for the Gravels. It was a chilling thought to Hamilton's legal community that the killings could have been executions meant to warn anyone involved in betraying the crime family. But a bail hearing, one of the longest in Canadian history, led to a judge to find the Crown's case was, quote, less than strong. One of the reasons, Judge Donald Gordon wrote, was at the possibility that someone else was responsible. Quote, I am satisfied the issue of an alternate suspect is very real, Gordon wrote in the part of his ruling that examined problems with this case. He named Mark Gilbank as a possible alternate suspect. During the bail hearing, lead investigator Steve Hrab, H-R-A-B, rejected the idea. His team had tunnel vision and said that Mark Gilbank had been investigated and cleared. Hamilton police today will say only that the investigation into the double slaying is still open. So, as you can see, there was, lawsuits involved with this whole thing. We know that there was some type of settlement, at least from the state. I don't know about whether the Gravels got anything from the family or not. I would certainly hope not, but hey, who knows? So let's see. There's another article this is from I think it's the Toronto Star. It says Hamilton wrestler Johnny K9, a member of BC, British Columbia gang. This is from August of 2011. A former pro wrestler from Hamilton is a member of a gang now linked to the slaying of BC gang leader Jonathan Bacon earlier this month. Ian Krotoru, 47, who wrestled professionally under the name Johnny K9, is a member of the United Nations criminal gang, according to police in British Columbia. Bacon, 30, was gunned down on August 14th, 2011, outside of Kelowna, BC resort. 4 others with him were wounded, including a woman who was paralyzed. No one has yet been charged in this death. Krotoru was already in custody for a plot to kill Bacon and his 2 brothers between January 1st, 2008 and February 17th, 2009. On Monday, Amir Eghstad, Eghted, 29, also a member of the United Nations gang, appeared in a Vancouver court charged with conspiracy to kill Bacon, his brothers, and their gang associates. Police say the Bacons form the core of a heavily involved in drugs and gun trafficking gang. He and his youngest brother, Jamie, had several previous assassination attempts. Krotoru is also awaiting trial for the first-degree murder in the shooting death of Jonathan Barber, 24, and the attempted murder of Vicky King on May 9th, 2008. Barber was driving a car believed to be owned by a gang leader when he was shot in Burnaby, BC. King, then 17, was shot in the car she was driving behind her boyfriend, police said. And in June 2006, Krotoru walked free from a Hamilton courtroom after the Crown's case in a marathon double murder collapsed. Krotoru, former president of Hamilton chapter of the Satan's Choice Motorcycle Club, had been charged with the execution-style slaying of Ancaster criminal lawyer Lynn Gilbank and her husband Fred in their home in 1998. The Gilbanks murders remain unsolved. Hamilton hitman Ken Murdoch told the Star last year that he was offered a contract from a Hamilton mob family to kill Krotoru, but didn't carry it out. Murdoch was convicted of the Niagara region contract killings of mobsters Johnny Pops Papalia and Carmen Barillaro in 1997. Krotoru was kicked out of the Satan's Choice Club for undisclosed reasons before they folded into the larger Hells Angels Club in 2000. So I think the documentary kind of cleared some of this up. For instance, he was kicked out of the Satan's Choice they thought he was a snitch, essentially. So there is tons of stuff that he was involved in. This murder, John Bacon, wasn't even mentioned in the documentary. The murder that they were talking about in the documentary, the second murder, not the Gilbanks murder, but the other murder, was Jonathan Barber. So this guy was involved with not involved with. He was tied to in some tangible way with 4 different homicides. And of course, the terrorist attack on the police station. Innocent until proven guilty. He beat most of these charges, but he did end up going to prison for 13 years for the attempted murder charge, which he pled guilty to. So I'm assuming he did that since he pled guilty to it. So, this is a real dark side of the ring. This is one of those things where it's legit sad to see, what he went through and what he did and how he may have harmed and bothered other people. And how the biker lifestyle is inherently dangerous. And he was just in love with it. He had a second chance because he managed to escape the biker life once. When Satan's Choice got, taken down, that was his impetus to get out of that stuff. But maybe he just loved the attention so much, just like the camaraderie, maybe. Because sometimes that's what, that's an underrated reason why people get into crime. Sometimes those are your only friends, are the people who are egging you on to do bad things. In any event, that's the story of Johnny K9. We, of course, could continue going on looking for more articles, but I think that we've got the gist of his. I know we didn't talk about his entire criminal history. His entire criminal history goes back to 1991. He got arrested for assault and I think it's smuggling cocaine or something like that. So we have, tons of. So like this video, share this video, subscribe to the channel, donate to the channel. Thank you guys for your time. Let me know what you guys thought of this whole thing. And I'll talk to you guys later.